The world's longest peaceful border is now a trade battleground. Canada has retaliated with $22 billion in tariffs on U.S. goods. This follows U.S. duties on Canadian lumber and dairy. Former President Trump urges doubling down, escalating tensions. The stakes are high, threatening the integrated U.S.-Canada economic relationship. What began as sector disputes has spiraled into a full-blown confrontation. Canada's unprecedented response marks a shift from negotiation to retaliation. This high-risk move aims to force U.S. concessions but risks a damaging trade war. The conflict comes at a precarious time for the global economy. The U.S.-Canada trade relationship, worth over $1.7 trillion annually, is crucial. The world watches as this dispute could redefine North American trade. The quiet border is now the front line in a trade dispute with far-reaching implications. Today's crisis stems from a long history of U.S.-Canada trade. The Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement of 1989 was a landmark deal. It eliminated tariffs, fostering economic integration. NAFTA expanded this vision, creating a massive free trade zone. Supply chains became deeply integrated, boosting growth but creating vulnerabilities. Political consensus around NAFTA fractured, leading to USMCA in 2020. USMCA updated digital trade and intellectual property but left tensions unresolved. The current crisis shows USMCA's fragile peace has shattered. Dispute resolution mechanisms are being tested like never before. The USMCA's stability is in question as the US and Canada face a significant trade crisis. The agreement's strength relies on political will, now under strain. The path forward is uncertain, with the USMCA's future hanging in the balance. The current dispute highlights the fragility of trade agreements. The mechanisms for resolution are being tested as never before. The USMCA's fragile peace has been shattered. This reveals a hard truth. Even the most detailed trade agreements are only as strong as the political will to uphold them. The current dispute demonstrates that the USMCA did not, and perhaps could not, eliminate the fundamental disagreements that have simmered for years. The mechanisms for dispute resolution within the agreement are now being tested as never before. The fragile peace of the USMCA has been shattered. This reveals a hard truth. Even the most detailed trade agreements are only as strong as the political will to uphold them. The current dispute demonstrates that the USMCA did not, and perhaps could not, eliminate the fundamental disagreements that have simmered for years. The mechanisms for dispute resolution within the agreement are now being tested as never before. The crisis ignited over softwood lumber, a long-standing issue. The U.S. claims Canadian subsidies undercut domestic mills. The U.S. Commerce Department imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian lumber. This impacts a $10 billion annual trade flow. The U.S. also targeted Canada's dairy sector, a contentious point. Canada's supply management system protects its farmers with high tariffs. The USMCA aimed to address this, but tensions remain. The U.S. imposed a 30% tariff on select Canadian dairy products. These actions aim to pressure Canada into concessions. The U.S. argues these tariffs protect American jobs and ensure fairness. The rhetoric is about fairness, citing job losses in U.S. industries. The tariffs strike at the heart of Canada's resource and agricultural economies. Canada views these tariffs as an assault on its sovereignty. The perception ensures a powerful Canadian response. The first salvo has been fired, setting the stage for a major confrontation. The U.S. administration stated that these tariffs were necessary to protect American jobs and ensure a level playing field. Officials in Washington pointed to data showing job losses in American lumber mills and the struggles of dairy farmers in states like Wisconsin and New York. The rhetoric was one of fairness and reciprocity, arguing that Canada had failed to live up to its trade commitments under the USMCA, leaving the U.S. with no choice but to act unilaterally. This two-pronged attack on lumber and dairy struck at the heart of Canada's resource and agricultural economies. It also hit two politically sensitive areas. The Canadian government views its supply management system as non-negotiable, a pillar of its agricultural policy that supports family farms. Canada's response was swift and strategic. Ottawa announced $22 billion in retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods. This was a calculated overreaction to U.S. actions. Prime Minister Trudeau stated Canada would not be bullied. The tariffs targeted U.S. goods with political and economic impact. Products like Kentucky bourbon and California wine were chosen. The goal was to create domestic pressure within the U.S. The tariffs were politically targeted, affecting key U.S. states. This sophisticated maneuver aimed to turn U.S. industries against the tariffs. Canada's approach marks a departure from traditional dispute resolution. The decision reflects a new, assertive posture. Ottawa calculated that inaction was riskier than escalation. This high-stakes strategy risks further escalation. Canada has drawn its line in the sand. The message was clear: Canada would not be bullied. The tariffs were designed to inflict maximum political and economic pain. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, in a firm address to the nation, stated that Canada will not be pushed around, and that these strong and proportionate measures were necessary to defend Canadian workers and industries against illegal and unjust U.S. actions. The trade war's impact is felt across sectors. U.S. lumber tariffs raise construction costs, affecting home prices. Canadian lumber and dairy industries face significant challenges. Retaliatory tariffs hit U.S. whiskey and agriculture hard. Farmers and producers face new barriers to Canadian markets. The broader risk is disruption of integrated supply chains. Automotive and manufacturing sectors face uncertainty. The chill effect deters investment and raises consumer costs. The North American manufacturing platform is under threat. The economic impact is widespread and damaging. The rhetoric is intense on both sides. The U.S. frames tariffs as defending sovereignty and fair trade. Canada sees them as a betrayal of partnership. Former President Trump complicates the situation with calls for tougher action. Both governments are engaged in high-stakes calculations. The public posturing masks complex negotiations behind the scenes. The trade war's human cost is real and immediate. A Vermont dairy farmer loses his export market overnight. A British Columbia mill worker faces reduced hours and uncertainty. Consumers see higher prices on goods like lumber and wine. Truck drivers experience increased tension and paperwork at the border. The erosion of goodwill and personal connections is significant. The impact is felt by small business owners and workers. The trade war acts as a hidden tax on aspirations and budgets. The human stories highlight the profound consequences of policy decisions. The trade war's impact is deeply personal and widespread. Economists see parallels to past trade disputes. This conflict is more focused and potentially damaging. The weaponization of trade policy against an ally is alarming. Historical precedents warn of protectionism spiraling out of control. Tariffs act as a tax on one's own supply chains. The USMCA's dispute resolution mechanisms face a critical test. A negotiated settlement is the only viable path forward. The longer the dispute drags on, the more permanent the damage. The US-Canada relationship is at a perilous moment. The trade dispute threatens the world's most integrated partnership. The conflict exposes the fragility of the USMCA. Strategic retaliation and defiant rhetoric create volatility. The economic impact is significant, threatening jobs and industries. The human stories remind us of the real consequences. The path forward requires political will and skilled diplomacy. A de-escalation is necessary to avoid long-term harm. The quiet border is now a line of economic conflict. Can leaders find an off-ramp before irreparable harm is done?